#HFY tale, Mender RE073, Deathworld, War, and Humanity. The air was heavy with the tang of scorched metal and the acrid bite of ozone. RE073, better known as Mender, stood amidst the ruins of what had once been a lush, alien forest. The trees, towering, crystalline structures that refracted light into rainbows, had been reduced to smoldering shards by orbital bombardments. The invaders' war machines prowled the periphery, their monstrous shapes blotting out the horizon. Mender wasn't human, not anymore. Once, she had been a medic in the Terran Space Corps, but war and necessity had stripped her of flesh and frailty. She was now a human mind housed in a cybernetic shell, designed for one purpose, to save lives, even on deathworlds like this one. She crouched beside an injured soldier, one of the native Calvarians, a species of six-limbed reptilian bipeds. The Calvarian's chitinous armor was cracked, exposing pulsing blue blood that oozed sluggishly from a gaping wound. Its faceted eyes flicked weakly toward Mender as she worked. "Stay still," she said softly, her voice calm and melodic despite its synthetic undertones. Her multi-tool word, extending a plasma cauterizer and a tissue regenerator in quick succession. "You, Terran," the Calvarian rasped, voice thick with pain. "Why do you help us?" Mender didn't look up. "Because you're alive, that's all the reason I need." The soldier tried to laugh, but it came out as a wet cough. "Your people are strange." Mender merely smiled, an expression that felt alien even to herself now. #Humanity's reputation. On deathworlds across the galaxy, the reputation of humans preceded them. They were known not just as warriors, but as relentless survivors. Where other species balked at hardship, humans thrived. They adapted, endured, and excelled in conditions deemed unlivable by others. For this reason, the galactic community had labeled Earth a deathworld, a place so hostile that life itself seemed improbable. The Calvarian resistance had been losing this war for months. Their homeworld, Glaston V, was under siege by the KRYX Imperium, a race of ruthless machine intelligences intent on stripping the planet of its resources. When the Terrans intervened, many Calvarians had been skeptical. Why would humanity, a species with no direct stake in the conflict, risk their lives for strangers? Mender represented the answer to that question. War machines and broken promises. The ground trembled beneath her as the KRYX's war machines advanced. Their jagged forms moved with an eerie grace, hovering just above the ground on anti-grav thrusters. Mender finished sealing the Calvarian's wound and activated his camo cloak, rendering him invisible to KRYX sensors. "Get to the evac point," she instructed, pulling him to his feet. "Now." "And you?" the soldier asked, fear creeping into his voice. "I've got work to do," she replied, already moving toward the front line. The Terran combat network hummed in her mind, feeding her real-time updates. Human squads were scattered across the region, holding the line with a mix of ingenuity and sheer stubbornness. Mender's job wasn't to fight, though she could, but to ensure the fighters stayed alive long enough to make a difference. Her internal systems pinged an alert. A squad of Terran Marines was pinned down half a click away, their vitals fluctuating dangerously. Without hesitation, Mender sprinted through the chaos, her reinforced legs propelling her over debris and shattered terrain. She arrived just in time to see a KRYX drone bearing down on a wounded Marine, its energy weapon charged with a high-pitched whine. Mender didn't think, she acted. Her left arm shifted, the plating retracting to reveal a pulse cannon. A single shot, perfectly calibrated, blasted the drone into scrap. She knelt by the Marine, her scanners already assessing his injuries. "You're lucky I got here when I did," she said, injecting a dose of nanomeds into his bloodstream. "Yeah, well," the Marine grunted, trying to grin through the pain. "You're a real lifesaver, Doc." The human spirit. By the time the battle ended, the KRYX had been driven back. The cost was high, as it always was in war, but the Calvarians had won a reprieve, however brief. Mender stood amidst the aftermath, her synthetic frame streaked with dirt and blood. Around her, Terran soldiers worked alongside Calvarian medics, tending to the wounded and salvaging what they could. A Calvarian elder approached her, his gait slow but steady. "Terran," he said, his voice resonant with both gratitude and awe. "You could have let us fall, many would have. Why didn't you?" Mender turned to face him, her human mind grappling for an answer that felt adequate. "Finally," she said, "because it's what we do. We fight, we endure, and we protect, not just for ourselves, but for anyone who needs it." The elder tilted his head, his multifaceted eyes glittering. "Perhaps that is why they call you Deathworlders, not because of your world's danger, but because you bring life to even the most hopeless of places." Mender smiled again, this time with a sense of peace. The war was far from over, but for now, humanity's spirit had made its mark, and in the darkest corners of the galaxy, hope burned a little brighter. Rebuilding in the ashes. The battlefield had been transformed. Where chaos and destruction had raged hours before, a fragile sense of calm now settled. The surviving Calvarians worked tirelessly, guided by Terran engineers and medics. Portable shelters sprang up, and supply drones descended from orbit, delivering food, medical supplies, and defensive equipment. Mender oversaw the triage area, where the most critically injured were treated. Her hands worked with precision, her mind simultaneously tracking multiple patients. Her neural core calculated probabilities and outcomes, but it was her human instincts, buried under layers of cybernetic augmentation, that guided her decisions. The Calvarian elder, who had introduced himself as Herix, returned to her side. "You and your people work as though the war is already won," he said, watching the organized chaos with a mixture of wonder and exhaustion. "Every moment we buy is a step toward victory," Mender replied without looking up, her hands weaving synthetic tissue over a deep plasma burn. "Wars aren't just won on the battlefield, they're won in the spaces in between, by keeping people alive, by holding on to hope." Herix nodded slowly. "Hope is a fragile thing, many of my people had lost it." Mender glanced up, her glowing blue optics locking onto his. "Hope is fragile, but it's resilient, just like your people, and mine." A new threat. The respite didn't last long. Mender's sensors picked up a high-frequency signal that sent a chill through her circuits. The KRYX were regrouping. The signal was different this time, more complex, more directed. She immediately patched into the Terran command network. "Command, this is Mender. KRYX forces are reforming, and I'm detecting an unusual signal, possible new strategy or reinforcements, requesting analysis." A moment later, a gruff voice replied, "Mender, this is Colonel Valen. We see it too. Recon drones confirm a new class of war machine moving toward your position, bigger, nastier, and heavily shielded. You'll need to prepare for a major assault." Mender's synthetic heart sank. The Calvarian forces were in no condition to withstand another full-scale attack. She relayed the information to Herix and the other resistance leaders. Herix's mandibles clicked in frustration. "We barely survived the last wave. If what you say is true, this will be the end." "Not if we make it the end for them," Mender said, her voice steely. "We need to fortify our position, set traps, and buy time for the evacuation ships to arrive." Herix hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, tell us what needs to be done." Preparing for the storm. Mender and the Terran engineers worked with relentless efficiency. They deployed energy barriers, laid mines, and rigged the terrain to channel the KRYX into choke points. The Calvarians, inspired by the humans' unyielding determination, threw themselves into the preparations. Night fell, and the horizon lit up with the eerie glow of the approaching KRYX forces. Their new war machines were colossal, towering constructs bristling with weaponry and protected by shimmering energy shields. They moved with a deliberate, menacing grace, their presence a stark reminder of the KRYX's relentless hunger. The defenders took their positions. Mender stood at the forefront, her systems fully charged and her pulse cannon primed. Despite her cybernetic enhancements, she felt the weight of the moment, of the lives depending on her. The battle for Glaston V. The KRYX attack began with a deafening barrage of energy blasts that lit up the night sky. The defenders held their ground, firing back with everything they had. The traps and fortifications slowed the KRYX advance, but the sheer power of their new machines threatened to overwhelm the lines. Mender was everywhere at once. Her advanced frame allowed her to leap into the thick of combat, tearing through KRYX drones with precision strikes, then retreating to repair and stabilize the wounded. Her presence became a rallying point, a symbol of defiance. But the tide began to turn when one of the massive KRYX war machines breached the outer defenses. Its energy weapons carved through the Calvarian lines, leaving devastation in its wake. Mender knew she had to act. She sprinted toward the behemoth, dodging its attacks with inhuman agility. Her neural core calculated weak points in its shielding. With a single, focused burst from her pulse cannon, she disrupted its shield generator, exposing its vulnerable core. "Now," she shouted over the comms. Terran Marines unleashed a barrage of heavy ordnance, reducing the war machine to a smoldering heap. Humanity's legacy. As dawn broke over the battlefield, the KRYX forces retreated, their ranks shattered. The Calvarians and Terrans stood together, battered but victorious. The evacuation ships arrived, taking the most vulnerable to safety, while those who remained began rebuilding with renewed determination. Herix approached Mender once more, his posture weary but proud. "You have given us more than victory, Terran. You have given us a future." Mender, covered in soot and battle damage, simply nodded. "That's what humanity does. We survive, we fight, and we build a better tomorrow." The elder studied her for a moment. "Perhaps you are more than Deathworlders. Perhaps you are Lifebringers. Mender looked out over the horizon, where the first rays of sunlight illuminated the scarred landscape. In the distance, the Calvarian children emerged from their shelters, their laughter breaking the silence. Maybe, she said softly, we're both. ##### a fragile alliance. Weeks passed, and the KRYX offensive dwindled, though the threat of their return loomed like a shadow over the Calvarian people. The resistance, bolstered by the combined ingenuity of the Terrans and the indomitable spirit of their own, began to transform their scattered settlements into fortified sanctuaries. Mender worked tirelessly, coordinating with both species to ensure the survival of the fragile alliance. The Calvarian elders called a council to discuss the future of their people and the unexpected partnership with the humans. Mender, along with Colonel Valen and a delegation of Terran officers, was invited to attend. The meeting took place beneath the crystalline ruins of the Calvarian capital, where the shattered remnants of their once proud structures glittered like fallen stars. Herix opened the proceedings. The KRYX have withdrawn for now, but we know they will return. Our people have endured much, but this war has cost us dearly. Without the Terrans, we would not have survived this far. A murmuring of agreement rippled through the council. Another elder, her scales shimmering with an iridescent hue, raised a clawed hand. Terrans, your bravery and strength are undeniable, but why do you fight for us? What do you gain from this alliance? Colonel Valen leaned forward, his rugged face hardened by years of war. Because it's what we do. Humanity doesn't stand by while others are crushed under tyranny. The KRYX are a threat to all life in the galaxy. Helping you isn't just the right thing to do, it's survival for all of us. Herix turned to Mender. And you, Mender? You have seen the worst of this conflict. What do you say? Mender's synthetic eyes glowed faintly as she considered her words. We fight because we know what it's like to face extinction. Our history is full of struggles against overwhelming odds. When we see others in the same position, we can't look away. We won't. #### Seeds of Understanding. The alliance grew stronger. The Calvarians, inspired by the Terrans' technological adaptability, began integrating human tactics and engineering into their own. Meanwhile, the Terrans learned from the Calvarians' deep connection to their planet, particularly their ability to harness its unique energy fields. Mender became a bridge between the two cultures. She trained Calvarian medics, teaching them how to use Terran equipment while respecting their traditional healing methods. In turn, the Calvarians showed her the subtle intricacies of their energy manipulation, a skill that seemed almost magical to her technological mind. One evening, as the twin moons of Glaston V cast a silver glow over the encampment, Herix approached Mender. He carried a small, glowing crystal in his claws, a fragment of one of the shattered forest spires. This is for you, he said, placing it in her hand, a token of gratitude from our people. It is a piece of our world, a reminder of what you have helped preserve. Mender held the crystal, its light reflecting in her synthetic eyes. Thank you, I'll keep it as a reminder of why we fight. #### The return of the KRYX. The peace didn't last. Scout drones detected KRYX activity at the edges of the system, and it soon became clear that the enemy was regrouping for another assault. This time, their fleet was larger, and their tactics more aggressive. Terran command scrambled to mobilize reinforcements, but it would take time for the nearest fleet to arrive. The defenders of Glaston V would have to hold out once more, and this time, they faced a foe that had learned from its failures. Herix gathered his people and the Terran forces for a final strategy meeting. The KRYX are relentless, but so are we, he declared. This is our home, we will not abandon it. Mender stood at his side. We've faced worse odds before, she said, her voice steady. If we fight together, we can win. #### The Last Stand. When the KRYX attack came, it was swift and merciless. Their fleet rained destruction from orbit, while ground forces surged toward the Calvarian strongholds, but the defenders were ready. The Calvarians used their energy fields to create barriers that deflected KRYX weaponry, while Terran soldiers unleashed advanced munitions that exploited the KRYX's weaknesses. Mender led the charge, coordinating the defense with precision and throwing herself into the thick of battle whenever the lines wavered. As the battle raged, Mender detected a new signal, a command relay deep within the KRYX formation. It was the key to their coordination, the brain of their operation. If it could be destroyed, the KRYX forces would collapse into disarray. I'm going in, Mender announced over the comms. Valen's voice crackled in her ear. It's suicide, Mender, that relay's deep in enemy territory. I wasn't built to stay safe, Colonel, she replied. Cover me. #### Sacrifice and Victory. Mender cut through the enemy lines with relentless efficiency, her augmented frame enduring the withering fire of KRYX drones. She reached the relay, a towering structure pulsing with alien energy. Her systems calculated the quickest way to overload it, a direct attack on its core. As the KRYX turned their full attention on her, Mender initiated the overload. The relay erupted in a cascade of energy, disabling every KRYX unit within range, but the explosion caught her in its radius, and her systems began to fail. Her last transmission crackled through the comms: "The relay is down, finish the fight." The defenders rallied, their combined forces overwhelming the disoriented KRYX. By dawn, the invaders had been driven from Glaston V. ###A hero remembered. Mender's remains were recovered from the battlefield, her frame battered but intact. The Calvarians and Terrans held a joint ceremony in her honor, placing her alongside the heroes of both species. Herrick spoke at the ceremony, holding up the glowing crystal she had carried. "Mender was more than a warrior, she was a symbol of what we can achieve together. Her legacy will guide us as we rebuild." And rebuild they did. Glaston V became a beacon of unity, its people inspired by the sacrifice of a lone Terran who had embodied the best of humanity. Though Mender was gone, her spirit lived on, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope and courage could forge a brighter future.